In the summer of 1966, a quiet revolution began in London. A young guitarist with a Les Paul in his hands, a Marshall amp behind him, and a comic book tucked under his arm unknowingly changed the entire future of the electric guitar. That guitarist was Eric Clapton, and the record was Blues Breakers with Eric Clapton, though fans soon gave it another name, the Beano album. This wasn't just another blues record. This was the record that made people stop, listen, and rethink what an electric guitar could truly sound like. It became a sacred textbook for guitarists everywhere, a rite of passage for anyone who ever dreamed of bending a string and making it sing. From bedroom beginners to arena legends, this album became their guide. Decades later, some of the greatest names in rock still point to Beano as the moment when the guitar found its modern voice. The birth of a revolution. London in early 1966 was alive with the sound of blues. The city's clubs were packed, and young British musicians were obsessed with American blues records. Among them was John Mayall, who led a band called the Blues Breakers, a revolving door of future legends. That year, he recruited a fiery young player who had just walked away from the Yardbirds. Eric Clapton. They headed into Decca Studios to record, and on July 22, 1966, the world was introduced to something completely new. Producer Mike Vernon and engineer Gus Dudgeon made a bold choice that changed everything. Turn it up. The amps were pushed to the limit. The valves were glowing red hot, and the microphones were placed dangerously close to the roaring sound. The result wasn't polished. It was alive, raw, and absolutely glorious, the sound that shook the world. The band was simple but tight. John Mayall handled keys, harmonica, and vocals. John McVie, who would later join Fleetwood Mac, locked down the bass line. Huey Flint drove the rhythm with a heavy swinging beat. And Clapton, well, he didn't just play, he spoke through his guitar. He even sang lead on Ramblin' on My Mind, showing that his talent went far beyond just fretwork. On the album cover, Clapton is seen reading a copy of the Beano comic, a casual, almost silly photo at the time, but that single image gave the record its immortal nickname, the Beano album. No fancy marketing was needed. The music itself did all the talking. The gear that made history Clapton's magic came from a perfect storm of tools and timing. He played a 1960 Gibson Les Paul Standard, plugged into a Marshall model 1962 combo amp. It was one of the first times anyone had ever recorded a Les Paul through a cranked-up Marshall, and it changed the entire landscape of rock overnight. The tone on Hideaway was warm and fluid. The attack on All Your Love cut like lightning, and on Steppin' Out, his runs were molten, full of fire and soul. It wasn't just loud, it was emotional. His guitar breathed. It moaned, it cried, it shouted. Guitar magazines would later call it the blueprint for how an electric guitar should sound. Every player since has chased that same elusive tone. The Beano sound, the art of less is more what. Made Clapton special wasn't just his technique, it was his restraint. He knew when not to play. He gave the amp room to breathe, letting each note bloom and fade naturally. His phrasing drew inspiration from blues heroes like Freddie King and Otis Rush, but what he created was something new, louder, grittier, and distinctly British for a generation of players. Learning the Beano album was like a guitar exam you couldn't skip. One of those young fans was Mick Taylor. Before joining the Rolling Stones, Taylor spent countless hours at home wearing out his copy of Beano. He later said proudly, "I learned the Beano album note for note." That dedication eventually earned him a spot in John Mayall's band, right after Clapton left. The influence spreads. Worldwide, the Beano effect didn't stop in Britain. Across the Atlantic, a young Eddie Van Halen was doing the exact same thing. He once admitted, "Clapton is the only one that's influenced me. I never had a guitar lesson in my life, except from Eric Clapton off of records." When Van Halen later redefined rock guitar in the 1970s, the DNA of Beano was still in every note he played. Another disciple was Gary Moore, who called Bino a massive influence on his own career. His signature fiery tone was one of the most direct descendants of Clapton's sound. And then there's Joe Bonamassa, who often says, "I learned to play blues guitar just from playing along to the Bino album." Clapton was the conduit for me. From London to Los Angeles, from vinyl to streaming, the same ritual continues, young guitarists learning the language of Clapton's Les Paul. The birth of the bluesbreaker legacy, the gear itself, became legendary. The Marshall 1962 combo used on that session became so iconic that fans and builders still call it the bluesbreaker amp. That combination of creamy mid-range, singing highs, and endless sustain has been copied, cloned, and modeled more times than any other sound in rock. Ironically, Clapton's actual Les Paul was stolen not long after, but the myth of that tone outlived the guitar itself. Its spirit carried on through players like Jimmy Page, Duane Allman, and Gary Moore, who each brought their own fire to that sacred formula. Why it still matters. So why does a blues record from 1966 still hit so hard today? It's partly the playing, partly the tone, but mostly it's the moment it captured. It's the sound of the electric guitar taking center stage for the very first time, stepping out from the rhythm section and demanding to be heard. It's loud, raw and pure, no effects, no tricks. Just fingers, wood, and tubes glowing hot. More than half a century later, guitarists still sit in their bedrooms, headphones on, trying to decode the magic, that phrasing, that vibrato, that perfect sustain. For John Mayall, it was one chapter in a long, brilliant career. For Eric Clapton, it was the beginning of his legend, the moment the world started calling him God. And for everyone else, it became the blueprint, the reference point for what an electric guitar should sound like. The eternal legacy, you can trace the Bino ripple effect through generations of players. Mick Taylor, Gary Moore, Eddie Van Halen, Joe Bonamassa, all carrying a piece of that spark. Each took the same foundation and built something new on top of it. And even today, when guitarists talk about that perfect tone, what they're really talking about, knowingly or not, is the sound of a Les Paul pushed to its limits in a small London studio in 1966. One comic book, one guitarist, one amp, and a tone that changed the sound of rock forever.
Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon.